So I would love to introduce Brandon Holmes, we are really excited to have here moderating in our panel, and also very excited to have as our incoming director for the Hudson Valley Regional Office of the New York Civil Liberties Union. Brandon is a leader in grassroots campaigns to end mass incarceration, driven by the ways he has seen incarceration affect his own family. Most notably, Brandon has experience in organizing and developing formerly incarcerated leaders throughout New York State. He was the organizer who led the passage of the New York City Fair Chance Act, which seeks to eliminate employment discrimination for justice-involved New Yorkers, and he recently managed the Close Rikers campaign, securing a bold commitment through a strategic plan to demolish all 14 of New York City's current jails by the year 2027 and replace them with 4 smaller, more humane detention facilities, prioritizing access to care and improving the conditions of confinement for incarcerated residents. Previously, Brandon served as an organizer for the New York Civil Liberties Union and is planning his return to the NICLU as the incoming Hudson Valley Regional Director. Welcome, Brandon. Welcome to all of our panelists. Welcome to all of our attendees. We're really excited to have you. So take it from here, Brandon.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And welcome, everybody. Good evening. We have a great panel today, so I'm going to get right into introducing everybody. And we want this to be a conversation between the experts in this issue area, and also be able to give you all something to walk away with, something to know what your next steps can be to take action or to educate yourselves more on the issues surrounding reparations. So first, I want to introduce Jennifer Bellamy, the Senior Legislative Counsel at the ACLU's National Political Advocacy Department. Jennifer joined the ACLU in 2008 and serves as a Senior Legislative Counsel in the organization's NPAD department, where she advocates on a range of racial justice issues. Jennifer has played a leadership role in the passage of the Fair Sentencing of 2010, which reduced the infamous and discriminatory sentencing disparity between crack and powder cocaine and began to address some of the serious racial disparities plaguing the criminal justice system. Thank you, Jennifer, for that work. Then I want to introduce Trevor Smith. Trevor is also a NICLU alum and is a narrative and cultural strategist who writes and researches on topics such as racial inequity, the wealth gap, and reparations. Trevor is currently the Director of Narrative Change at Liberation Ventures, where he is building the first narrative lab that is dedicated to building narrative power behind reparations. Trevor has previously worked in the program and communication roles at the Surdna Foundation, ACLU, and the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Thank you, Trevor, for your amazing work and the legacy you've left around this issue. And next, I want to introduce Congressman Jamaal Bowman, who represents New York's 16th District. Congressman Bowman's district includes the Northern Bronx and parts of Westchester County, including his home of Yonkers. He was elected to Congress in 2020, and Jamaal Bowman ran on a platform of transformative, progressive policies that will no doubt improve the lives of those who have been legislated out of the American dream. Congressman Bowman is dedicated to passing visionary policy that infuses climate justice with economic and racial justice, and to highlighting the importance of research and investing in communities of color on the ground. Thank you very much, Congressman Bowman. So with the 3 panelists, this first question to start our conversation, I want to set the stage for all of you. So if you'll indulge me, please close your eyes. And I want you to envision this, right? It is the perfect world. And you wake up and you and whoever you trust most in this work are now co-directors of the United States Department of Reparations. I'm going to ask each of you in order to name one single issue or discipline area where you would start to invest in immediate reparations. So first I want to go to Jennifer, then we'll go to Trevor, and then Representative Bowman. So Jennifer, one single issue or discipline area that you would invest in immediate reparations.
Well, thank you so much, Brandon, for that question and for that introduction. This is a very thoughtful way to begin our discussion. And with this question, which is very, it's really sort of a, foundational question. I would say if I had the power to make that decision, I would invest my decision-making power in creating a commission, because I want all of it. And I want to be able to address the range of issues and look at the ways that we have been impacted by institutional racism and by the practices that were enshrined in law in this country over decades. And so I think in order to fully do this justice, I like the commission approach that is outlined in HR 40, and I know we'll have an opportunity to talk about it more later, because it is holistic, because it does not limit us, and we are able to not only bring the ideas that we have, and I'm sure the other panelists will have excellent ideas to share. In addition to any idea that I could think of, there will be others who will have the opportunity to share ideas. And also we'll get to hear from people who are impacted in their communities as well. So it really lays out a very comprehensive process similar to the one that we saw Japanese Americans successfully undertake in their fight for reparations.
Thanks. Trevor, you're up.
Thanks for that, Jennifer. And yeah, Brandon, this is a very hard question. It's kind of like asking a parent to pick their favorite child. It's really hard. So I'm going to kind of follow Jennifer's lead, and really, I can't just pick a single thing, because that's the thing about reparations. It can't be looked at as a single pronged issue, because harm was caused in multiple ways. So at Liberation Ventures, we're building out this framework that's based on a variety of concepts from the UN Human Rights, Movement for Black Lives, National African American Reparations Commission, and COBRA, and Dr. Darity and Kirsten Mullen's work, and thinking about this holistically, and we're calling it a repair framework. And so it includes redress, which can and should include compensation, but then it also includes reckoning, and we talk about accountability and acknowledgement. And we think those four components are what makes the comprehensive reparations program. So in addition to financial compensation, which I think should come in directly in the form of cash, but could also look like student loan forgiveness or business grants, we need a reckoning in this country. I think, as we all know, and we all seen this kind of anti-history, critical race theory fight, we need to also change the curriculum and shift public conversations. We need a real truth and reconciliation process, which I know Representative Bowman has advocated for. And ultimately, we need to change our culture, because, as I said, it needs to be a constant process to build this culture of repair. And then acknowledgement. I think harm has been caused, as I said, in multiple spaces. And so I think an apology is needed, not only at the federal level, but also at the local, state, and in the private sector. And so I'm sorry, I can't answer it directly how you asked, but I hope that kind of gives you a sense of how reparations should be thought about.
Great. Congressman?
Okay, I'm not gonna cheat. My two fellow panelists, they both cheated. Even though I agree with everything they said, I'm gonna try to answer the question. It's interesting, as I was closing my eyes, what came to mind for me was housing. I don't know why, but that came to mind first. And I guess I'm thinking about reversing the impact of redlining on our communities. So I'm thinking about housing and community development, and thinking about the security of housing, of adequate housing, the safety of adequate housing, and how adequate housing can provide the space for freedom of thought, the space for creativity, the space to build the world that we are trying to build for the African American community. I just thought about housing. Housing came to mind for me, thinking about how, public housing has been neglected, again, redlining and the New Deal, and how that created or contributed to the separate and unequal America that we have, wealth inequality related to housing. That's what came to mind for me. But I agree with Jennifer and Trevor. They are absolutely right. That would be the first thing, but it's not going to be the only thing, because obviously there's so much more to repair based on historical harm.
Thank you, each of you, for your perspectives, and definitely pushing back to challenge that it must be comprehensive. Anything we talk about has to be a comprehensive plan. So that leads us to just talking about how there's been many ways that the U.S. has either attempted or successfully issued reparations in the past, right? And then there's many ways that we can be demanding that the U.S. government do so now, whether that's in the form of direct checks to the descendants of enslaved people, or if that's housing vouchers and grants that would be made available specifically for people who are impacted by the justice system. I want to ask first, Trevor, who should be at the forefront of negotiating what a comprehensive reparations plan should look like? And can you talk a little bit about why those are the communities involved?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. I think as with most issues, the people closest to the issue, those directly impacted, specifically when it comes to reparations, because reparations is about addressing past harm done onto communities, specific communities. Those are the folks that must be leading it. What's important though, I think, is that it's as inclusive of Black Americans as possible, right? So because racial injustice in this country, as it relates to Black people, it's impacted millions of people. So only the federal government has the capital and the convening power to get the various entities needed in a room to craft a comprehensive reparations policy. And so that's exactly what HR 40 seeks to do. By creating this commission, it seeks to empower whoever might serve on that commission to ensure that the voices of Black Americans are represented in this comprehensive policy.
Thanks, Trevor. And I want to go to Jennifer next. Jennifer, could you share some examples around reparations or past examples of reparations that we can learn from today?
I'm so glad you asked me that question, Brandon. And I just also want to add a little bit, if I can, to Trevor's answer before about having people at the table. I think one of the things that is going to be very beneficial from the HR 40 process is providing that opportunity for impacted people to lead the way in the work, but also providing an opportunity for impacted voices to be heard. One of the things that we learned from our friends in the Japanese American community that was very healing and therapeutic was just having the opportunity to tell the truth about what happened to them during the internment of Japanese Americans for which they received reparations from the federal government. A part of that process, in addition to creating a commission very similar to the commission that the commission in HR 40 is modeled after, and just in case folks are not aware of it, HR 40 is a bill that is in Congress that would establish a commission that would examine the institution of slavery and its legacy and make recommendations for reparations to Congress. And it's modeled after a bill that was developed during the Japanese American fight for reparatory justice, which they ultimately succeeded in receiving reparations for the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II. And one of the things that we learned from our friends in the Japanese American community was the opportunity to be heard at hearings that were held around the country during this commission process was very therapeutic, just having an opportunity for folks to make their voices heard. So I just wanted to add that when we talk about the comprehensive opportunity that people will have to be a part of this HR 40 process. The other piece that I'll say, which is a largely unknown fact, is that this country does have a history of paying reparations. In 1860, America had about 4 million enslaved people. And there were, as a result of it, there were a number of millionaires in the United States, and that wealth was directly from the enslavement of others. But what people may not know is that in 1862, before President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, he paid reparations to enslavers of people. He paid $300 for each enslaved person that was freed. And so the country has paid reparations. People may say, oh, it's too hard, it's impossible, we've never done it before. But if we look in the history of the United States, we have done it. And this is just justice. This is about justice delayed, doesn't necessarily have to be justice denied. And the total that the Lincoln administration paid was about $1 million to the people who had enslaved people, and that was just for those folks who were living in DC. So I just wanted to flag that, fact that might not be known to everyone, but I think it is very important in this conversation as we're talking about reparations.
Thank you. Yeah, to know that there's such an old history of the country acknowledging that harm and actively doing something gives me a little bit of hope to think that HR 40 could be the next iteration of that. This could be something that this generation is able to reflect on and say, like, we didn't let that legacy die. So I want to pass to Representative Bowman. Could you talk to us about the status of the HR 40 Commission, and what can you tell us about maybe advancing or elevating the work that the commission is about to take on?
Absolutely. I just want to go back to something Jennifer just said, just to make sure I heard her clearly. Abraham Lincoln, President Lincoln, paid reparations to the slave masters who lost their slaves in Washington, D.C. Is that correct? Is that what you're saying?
That is correct. That is what I'm saying.
Got it. So we paid the slave master for
I didn't even catch that, I have to say.
Yes.
Oh my God.
For their losses, but we haven't provided recompense to the formerly enslaved and their ascendants. Wow, that's powerful. Thank you for sharing that. And just one brief comment on, who's at the table, right? So first of all, there have been people who have been researching this issue for several decades. So we definitely want them to be a part of the conversation. Obviously, people who have been most impacted by the legacy of slavery need to be a part of the conversation as well. And congressional hearings, as well as hearings across the country, can be a part of that. But with 21st century technology, there's a way to crowdsource and make sure we get as much feedback and input from as many people across the country as possible. So I think that's going to be key, because that large conversation is going to help with the healing process as well, because everyone will have an opportunity to have their voices be heard. And recent research has identified the epigenetic intergenerational impact of slavery on African Americans today. So we're not just talking about de facto and de jure, we're talking about how genetically is passed down through transgenerational epigenetics. So that's recent research. I'm still reading it, still going through it, but it's another data point to show the need for a study, the need for a commission to study the impact is needed. Right now, HR 40 is moving through the House of Representatives. So for the last 30 years, it's been introduced, but it's never been marked up in committee and voted out of committee. This is the first year it's ever been voted out of committee. So that's a really, really big deal. It has over 200 co-sponsors, and you need 218 votes for it to pass the House. Today we had a press conference, and I'm in communication right now with Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, who is the lead sponsor for this bill. And we are working to work with the leadership of the House to bring it to the floor for a vote. Now, what's key here is it's not just about Congresswoman Jackson Lee's voice and leadership, or my voice and leadership. We need everyone out in the community that supports HR 40 being brought to the floor for a vote to engage House leadership and push them to bring it to the floor for a vote. That is constant phone calls, that is constant letters, that is constant emails, that is going on social media, that's going on any media that's out there to continue to apply that pressure. We are about to ratchet up the pressure. Hopefully we'll pass the Build Back Better Act this week and then push to pass our budget, to push the Senate on voting rights. But in terms of the House, the next big fight in the House, it has to be HR 40. Immigration reform has already passed the House, sitting in the Senate. Common sense gun reform passed the House, it's in the Senate. Voting rights passed the House, it's in the Senate. HR 40 is the next big fight, and we need everyone to engage with their local reps, but also leadership. Speaker Pelosi, Leader Hoyer, Whip Clyburn, and Chair Jeffries. We need to put a lot of pressure so that it could be brought to the floor for a vote.
Thank you. I want to share a little bit about poll that was taken in 2020. It's shown that 31% of people support the idea of reparations, which is an increase from 19% when a poll was taken in 1999. So over 21 years, we saw a 12% increase in support for reparations. However, we still have 63% of Americans saying they oppose the idea of reparations, and the racial disparities there are very clear, right? With over 8 in 10 Black Americans supporting reparations and over 75% of white Americans saying they oppose reparations. So Trevor, because you're doing a lot of narrative work and you're preparing for a listening tour around reparations, could you talk a little bit about what you think may contribute to the rise in support for reparations, and what kind of narrative shifts or moments do we need to bring it more to the forefront, to make it more popular?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm really glad you asked this question because, as you said, it's something that I've been focused on a lot right now. So in terms of the increase of support, I think there's obviously, as you know, Brandon, a lot of behind the scenes things. You know, organizers on the ground have been pushing this issue forward for years. There's legacy organizations, some of which who I named at the top, NARC and COBRA, who have been advocating for this issue for years. So there's, you know, advocacy organizing work that's been going on for centuries, really. You know, I first came into this work through research, learning about Queen Mother Audley Moore. And so we're really standing on the shoulders of our ancestors. And so, as you know, nothing gets done just by magic. So it's a lot of the organizers. But then there's also some really tangible things. The Case for Reparations, I think, by Ta-Nehisi Coates, written in The Atlantic a couple of years ago, is a piece that brought a lot of folks who were not familiar with the topic at all into the subject, right? And so he obviously is just a brilliant writer. And so that's a piece that I still reference today, and people who are still new to the topic reference today. And I urge folks who might not have read it to just Google The Case for Reparations. It's the first thing that'll come up. And then more recently, the 1619 Project, right? And so I was trained as a journalist. I have a comms background. And so those two pieces, I think, are some of the most powerful pieces that have really increased public awareness and really reframed the story that we tell about America. And it's reframing it from a story of an exceptionalism to one of theft. And so those two pieces, I think, have really increased support. And so then in terms of the polling, you know, at LV, we're doing some polling and we're having conversations, and we're seeing support increase when you frame reparations related to kind of more recent wrongdoing. So things like police brutality, you know, folks can kind of grasp onto, which I think makes sense. You know, I think non-Black people today can see and even themselves experience bad interactions with the police. And so our polling shows that when you frame reparations within kind of the more recent injustices in the criminal justice context, support goes up. And then we're also seeing support go up when you frame it as financial compensation, in addition to things like housing and housing grants and education investments. So I say all that to say that, you know, polling is important. We're going to be doing some more intentional comms work with this polling, but I really think, and I really focus on the narratives and narrative change. And I think about narratives as kind of the averages of our most popular stories, right? And so what are the most popular stories that we've told about race in America? They've all been anti-Black. They're rooted in anti-Blackness. The first form of popular entertainment in this country, the minstrel shows, are rooted in anti-Blackness. And then a lot of those tropes and stereotypes persist today. So anti-Blackness is the meta-narrative that we're kind of grappling with, and then there's kind of sub-narratives underneath that. The racial progress narrative is one that often, you know, crops up. Mitch McConnell, when he got asked about reparations, he said, "We don't need things like reparations because we elected a Black president in Barack Obama." And so this idea that we are inching closer to this post-racial country, you know, is a falsehood. And then it really makes people overly optimistic and overestimate the state of racial and economic inequality. And we also have the meritocracy narrative. That's one we're up against. And then one I think, you know, doesn't get much attention is the lost cause narrative. You know, the idea around the Confederacy and the stories we tell about the Confederacy. I had the pleasure to see Ta-Nehisi Coates and Nicole Hannah-Jones last night in Brooklyn for the release of her new book, The 1619 Project. And she talked about how we don't view the Confederacy in the same light of how we view Nazis and Nazism. We would, Germany would never have a monument of Hitler, but we have monuments in schools named after Robert E. Lee, even though, they tried to tear this country apart to ensure that the institution of slavery would stick around. So these are the narratives I think that we're up against, and we have to be really intentional about creating a strong narrative infrastructure like those on the right have, as we've seen with this critical race theory fight, to really push back on it.
Thank you, Trevor. And that kind of leads me into one thing you said there, right? That there's this post-racial narrative, right? That we're beyond this. We've elected a Black president before, and hey, he even got a second term, right? But in the debate about reparations, another thing that comes up with that is people talking about slavery and saying that, slavery is ended, kind of talking about it as it's a thing of the past. But we know, thanks to a lot of media and narrative work done around the 13th Amendment, that the 13th Amendment still protects the right to treat incarcerated people as slaves. So I want to actually ask both Jennifer and Representative Bowman, if you could respond to this question. In our fight to push for reparations, how do we include those who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated, despite the harm they may have caused or all the reasons that people will tell us, like, reparations are for good Black people, or reparations are for this group of people, not that group of people? How do we challenge those narratives? And maybe even if you have any experience in having those conversations, tell us, what have you gone through? So we can start with Jennifer.
Okay, I'm glad you asked that question, because, one of the legacies of slavery is the disproportionate incarceration of African-American people. As a society, we have chosen to invest more into incarceration than we've invested in communities and building communities. And we've also invested more in the types of things that result in over-incarceration and mass incarceration than we've invested in interventions. And, one of the things that you mentioned before is this idea, that, enslavement of people happened long ago, and, so we shouldn't really focus on it. But I think what that conversation overlooks is the legacy of slavery. We had redlining that was very prevalent for a long time. We had lynching. We had various forms of discrimination and exclusion from employment opportunities, from lending and banking opportunities, from opportunities for farmers. I mean, there were so many opportunities that the federal government alone provided that African-American people were categorically excluded from just because of being African-American. But then also, while they were excluded from opportunity, they were disproportionately given this pathway to mass incarceration. And frequently, as we will see if we're looking in at the statistics, frequently for very similar types of things, but the penalties are harsher and the effects are longer lasting. And so the benefit of HR 40 is that the commission will look at all of it. And absolutely, we have to have everyone at the table and hear all of those stories. But I think the benefit of the commission is that would it examine all of these different areas and make recommendations that will address all of the ways that the legacy of slavery have impacted African-American people in this country.
Every descendant or ascendant of slaves will benefit from the study for the need for reparations and reparations themselves, every single one. Jennifer is absolutely right. Mass incarceration is a part, sort of the evolution of the continued oppression of Black people in this country. We escaped the South, the Jim Crow South. We escaped the Ku Klux Klan, or attempted to, and we came north and to the Midwest, and we found redlining and a lack of jobs and police that were a part of a system of mass incarceration. This is about repair, and this is about healing, and our brothers and sisters and binary people who are incarcerated need healing as much as everyone else. So not just a part of the table, at the table and a part of the conversation, but definitely will benefit from reparations and the study of reparations. So absolutely, it's this country, it's repairing the harm caused by the country's original sin that didn't end with the ending of slavery. Slavery, Jim Crow, the Klan, redlining, crack cocaine, mass incarceration, police brutality, intergenerational epigenetics. It's all part of it, right? So that's what we're healing. And we need all voices and all narratives and all stories and all reality to be a part of that.
Thank you. Thanks, both of you. So I want to pause here. We are going to start moving towards our Q&A portion. So if anybody has a question, you can put that into the chat, or there's a Q&A function. If you see down at the bottom of your screens, you can use the Zoom Q&A function. We'll start to pull some questions from there. But first, closing question for each of our panelists. I want to ask, for people who want to increase their education or begin taking immediate action to support the fight for reparations, what would you recommend? And let's start with Trevor.
So when thinking about using your voice, particularly if you're a non-Black person, think about where you hold places of power, and try to advance those conversations, around reparations and reparative justice in those spaces. In terms of using your time, I know we're all busy, but these orgs that are working on reparations advocacy day to day, the folks on the ground doing the organizing work, they're underfunded. And so thinking about what skill sets you might have and how it might be beneficial. There's a white ally group who I held a fundraiser for last year called the Fund for Reparations Now. And in a similar way to Surge, they convene and organize white people. And so I think if you're a white person interested in getting involved in this issue, I would look them up either on Instagram, they have a Twitter, they also have a website, and they fall under NARC. And then obviously use your dollars. I think obviously the bulk of funding has to come from philanthropy or high net worth individuals. And then again, the government has to pass HR 40 so that we can really see the change that we seek. But in order for that to happen, the organizers have to organize, the researchers have to research, the communications people have to do the communications work. And so think about how you could pool your funds with colleagues and move it to places at the local level. There's organizations like the Beloved Community Center, Media 2070, which I know Representative Bowman actually has partnered with before. The Truth Telling Project. If you're interested in how young people are advocating around this issue, look into the Amendment Project. So there's a host of organizations doing the work that do need your dollars. And so those are the things I'd say.
Great, thank you. Jennifer.
Well, I really appreciated Trevor's very comprehensive list. That was very thorough. And I really, just echo his comments. All of this websites and resources that he identified, I think are particularly helpful in becoming educated on the issue. And I will also just lift up that on the ACLU's website, there is an action alert that people can go to. And when they get to that, action alert, they can send a letter to their member of Congress and ask their Congress member to co-sponsor HR 40. And if they're already a co-sponsor, they can ask their member of Congress to urge that this be brought to the floor for a vote. So I will lift that up as an additional resource as well.
Thank you. And Representative Bowman.
Please contact my office. Just contact my office, call my office, email my office. We're going to be organizing people around this issue so that we can move Congress, leadership in the House in the direction it needs to go. So do everything that Trevor and Jennifer said, absolutely do those things, but also contact my office and we'll help everyone get organized around how we're going to put pressure on leadership and other members in the House to make sure this gets moving, because we are so close. We are closer than we have ever been in passing HR 40. And if we pass HR 40 in the House, there have been some whispers that it doesn't even have to pass the Senate, that will be enough for the president to sign an executive order and form the commission with the House's passage. So it's really key for us to continue to apply pressure in the House to make sure the leadership moves it. And I'm talking leadership. Again, Speaker Pelosi, Leader Hoyer, and others. But contact our office and we'll help you get moving in terms of applying that pressure.
Great, well, thank you all. And folks, don't go anywhere. We still have about 15 minutes left to ask them some questions. We do have 2 questions in the chamber right now. I'm gonna start with one. And anybody who feels equipped to answer this, please come off mute and go right ahead. Shouldn't people who cannot demonstrate an enslaved ancestor, but who have suffered from racist discrimination, be included in reparations? Does anyone wanna take that question?
I can respond to that. I think one of the benefits of HR 40 is that it establishes a commission that will examine the institution of slavery and its legacy and then make recommendations to Congress. And so instead of trying to address the big issues like the one that you raise at the outset, we are establishing this commission process so that everyone has an opportunity to be heard. And as a part of this process, those types of issues can be looked at and those types of determinations can be discussed and made. And so I think, you're raising exactly the types of things that we need to be thinking about. And then we also have a process that is set up as we move forward.
Thank you. And before our next question, I want to just flag something in case some folks aren't watching the chat. Some folks from NCOBRA have shared that they've identified 5 ways that folks still suffer, which are nationhood or peoplehood, education, health, wealth, as well as criminal punishment. So if you're looking for a framework to start having these conversations at home, there's another resource that you can look into, shared by NCOBRA. Our next question, someone asked, given the importance of HR 20 and its tie to civil rights, why wasn't it a part of the civil rights legislation? Does anyone understand the prompt?
I may have just gotten here. Do they mean HR 40 when they say HR 20? I mean, I don't know what is HR.
Yeah, it does say HR 20, but I believe it may mean HR 40, yes. So why was it not a part of civil rights legislation is the question.
Well, it's interesting. When I first got here and started having conversations about HR 40, the response from leadership and others was, something to the effect of the country isn't ready for it. The country wasn't ready to have the reparations conversation. Civil rights is obviously an important conversation. We passed the Civil Rights Act, I believe, in 1965. It's something that, everyone can wrap their minds around. Yes, we all deserve civil rights. We all deserve human rights. But when you start talking about reparations in a country that's still majority not Black, people start thinking that, in terms of the narrative piece, you're taking money or something from them and giving it to Blacks for something that they didn't do, right? We didn't own slaves, I'm not a part of that, right? So what I was told when I first got here is the country wasn't ready for that, even after George Floyd. So the work that Trevor's doing is so important because it is about narrative and it is about storytelling. It is around engaging in conversations because we have to shift paradigms in terms of what we're talking about and what we actually mean and how it heals the entire country and benefits the entire country. Those are 2 major parts of the narrative that we have to move towards now, not just not allow it to be kicked down the road again, which is going to happen if everybody on this call doesn't apply pressure on leadership right now. It'll be something that we will not tackle during this Congress.
And I guess to piggyback on that, I want to ask any of you who want to jump in, right? One of the biggest arguments against reparations is the cost of implementation. When we have a plan, it's going to cost money, and that makes people upset. But since the COVID-19 pandemic began, we've seen US billionaires increase their wealth by 62%, or $1.8 trillion richer. And this has also allowed wealthier individuals to thrive, and just devastated small business owners and working class families, and predominantly Black Americans were and continue to be disproportionately affected by the financial burdens of the pandemic. So what would you say to somebody who thinks that providing reparations right now just doesn't make sense or is unrealistic because of the quote economy?
So I would just like to share, I think as most folks are aware, in June, with unanimous support in the Senate and, overwhelming support in the House, a bill establishing a Juneteenth National Independence Day was quickly voted out of Congress, and it was passed into law, signed into law by the president. And that bill, which provided a federal holiday, while it's important, it was a very expensive bill. And, while those types of symbolic measures are important, what we need is reparatory justice. We need HR 40. And so if we're just looking at cost, there's already been demonstrated willingness to spend money on a Juneteenth national holiday. But here we're asking, our Congress and our leadership to move beyond the symbolic and provide reparatory justice, and, in the simple form of establishing a commission. And so I just want to hold that up as a just recent demonstration of how we have been willing to spend on this topic, but not gone far enough.
What I'd say is, in the same year that Jennifer was talking about it, when Abraham Lincoln gave enslavers reparations, that same year the Homestead Act was signed, and it gave away millions of acres for free, most of which went to white people. So in fact, 1.5 million white people, both American-born and immigrant, profited from the Homestead Act. And I was doing research earlier today, and what floored me is that in the year 2000, so at the turn of the millennium, there was about 46 million people, which was a quarter of the US population at the time, who were descendants of the original Homestead Act recipient. And so many white people can trace their economic stability and wealth to one policy, to one kind of large land wealth transfer. And so when it came to white people, we had no issue doing it. And then I think the other thing I would say is that our spending, really signals what our values are. Immediately as we were coming out of Afghanistan, we saw, figures that came out about how much we spent on a obviously needless war. And I think I saw a figure that we spent 5.8 trillion on all conflicts stemming from September 11th, 2001, up until today. And so 5.8 trillion is almost half of what a reparations package would cost, according to Dr. Darity and other academics who think that a reparations package that would close the racial wealth gap would be about 12 to 13 trillion. And so we find the money for other things, and we find the money for occupation, and we find the money for killing people. And so I think we could also find the money for things like this.
Yeah, we find the money for war. We find the money for white people, not just today, but historically. But when it comes to African Americans, we never find the money. The federal government is different than state and local governments. So state and local governments have to balance budgets, right? Like at a kitchen table, the way we all do with a checkbook, we have to balance budgets. We collect X amount of taxes, invest in public goods, pay salaries, pay pensions, and all of those things. The federal government is different. We are a sovereign nation. We have a fiat currency. Our money is not connected to gold any longer. So we can do something called, or engage in something called deficit spending or investing in the economy at any level we choose. We just did it during the COVID pandemic to re-stimulate the economy, to rescue the economy. We did it in 2008 during the housing crisis when we bailed out big banks in the form of hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars. Trump, in his first year president, he gave $5 trillion tax breaks to the wealthiest among us. Again, we invest in what we prioritize. It's just historically, we haven't prioritized Black folk, and we haven't prioritized repairing the harm of slavery and its legacy. And you know, when you invest in historically marginalized people and communities, people then contribute more to the economy, and it actually makes the economy stronger, which is something that's not talked about enough. And it'll increase GDP. And what also needs to happen is you tax the wealthy and large corporations equitably, and that helps control inflation and keeps it balanced. What we have now is we don't tax the wealthy and corporations equitably, so things remain out of balance because wealth remains concentrated in their hands. If you give everybody else wealth and don't adjust the tax code, then we'll have out of control inflation. So it's a BS argument, as someone put in the chat.
Thank you. I think we will have time for one more question or so. This is going to be a mix of a couple different questions we're getting, but I think you've all spoken directly to, like, how do we protect the narrative and the process of identifying what reparations should look like, what a comprehensive reparations package should look like. That's including folks who have researched this for decades. That's including people who are most impacted and people, you know, who are impacted in different areas, whether it be housing, whether it be mass incarceration. But are there any, I guess the question here that I'd want to toss out to kind of capture what people are putting in the chat is, are there any like pitfalls or threats to co-opting this movement and this narrative that you all can foresee, and kind of give us some like tools on how we can challenge that and like stay firm in our belief that directly impacted communities must be at the table talking about reparations, and that we cannot allow this to be, you know, a thing that is, we're beyond that. We're beyond race. So this is just going to cause more harm. How do we show that, or, you know, tell that story? I hope that made sense.
Yeah, I think, you know, what I'd say is what I'm a little bit afraid of in terms of the co-optation is, you know, sort of what we heard from Mitch McConnell earlier when he got asked, you know, last year around the uprisings. You know, I don't want the government to, the federal government, for Congress to think that an increase in housing vouchers or increase in SNAP or things that we're already doing, you know, are reparations. You know, Representative Bowman talks about Medicare for all. He talks about federal jobs guarantee. Those things are needed in addition to reparations. And so what I don't want is folks, you know, saying, well, we're going to do UBI, or we're going to do baby bonds, or we're going to do a federal jobs guarantee. That's your reparations. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about both. We're talking about federal jobs guarantee and reparations. And so that's what I'm scared of. But when we have folks like Representative Bowman there, I'm confident that that's not going to happen, but it is a slight scare of mine, but I think we're heading in the right direction.
Yeah, I would just add, I appreciate the kind words, brother, but I'm not enough. And what I mean by that is we need more people like me here, number one, and we have a good, nice group that I think many of you know very well, which is great. In addition to that, we need outside pressure as well, because I've watched special interest groups wield power in Congress like you wouldn't believe. Fossil fuel industry, pharmaceutical companies, and many other lobbies, Fraternal Order of Police. They'll call leadership and tell leadership to have a bill voted on the same day, and all of a sudden it'll be on our calendar and we'll vote on it same day. They'll call leadership and ask leadership to pull a bill will get pulled same day. So I've watched that kind of power be wielded, and Trevor's absolutely right. This this conversation can be degraded into something like housing vouchers, which again are great and very helpful and absolutely needed. But that's one aspect of what we're talking about. And that's why we got to continue to push very aggressively the envelope of the commission, because, you know, everybody on this call already knows what the commission is going to find. But we want America to see, and we want to be very transparent, so everyone, so it's undeniable that the need is there, and what that need is ultimately going to be.
Yeah, I think the thing that you know, I'm concerned about, and I guess I'm more optimistic than concerned, because I think in order to do advocacy, you have to be a bit of an optimist and a worker. And I think the thing that I would just like for us to continue to do is to keep working. I think anytime you're close to the finish line, especially if you've been you know, advocating for something for a long time, it can be tempting to say, well, you know, we are not quite there yet, so let's just forget it. And that would just be such a tragedy. We're so close. I mean, we've made so much progress. We've made more progress in the last Congress than we had in the, you know, previous history of the bill. In the 114th Congress, I think there were 2 co-sponsors. As Congressman Bowman said, in this Congress, we have around 200 co-sponsors and adding daily. So this is absolutely the time to push. This is absolutely the time to continue to put that pressure where we need it on a political process. Because that's what's needed in order to get things done on Capitol Hill. We don't, you know, get close to the finish line and then walk away, you know, from what we have, but we keep pushing until we get the win that we want. And I think that's absolutely what we need here. And so, so that's the thing that, you know, I want to see, is that because we are so close, I think we need to be more energized and more strategic and keep pushing until we get over the finish line.
Great. And I'm so glad that all 3 of you felt energized to respond to that question, because that will be the end of this amazing panel. I want to thank Jennifer Bellamy, Trevor Smith, and Representative Bowman for your time and expertise tonight, and all the resources that you were able to share with folks. And I also want to thank Lucia for pulling this event together. And I look forward to working with you all when I join the New York Civil Liberties Union in January. Everyone, have a good evening.
Peace and love, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Everyone.